Because of the fact that I lived in Rochester, New York until I was 12 years old, and because my father felt that he could drive through any snowstorm no matter how bad it was, I spent some time as a child snowed up on the side of the highway in a car that wouldn't go any further. And one time when I was 4 years old, and I can remember this fairly well, we were in the family car. My older brother and I were in the back seat. My mother and father were in the front seat, and my mother was holding my new baby brother, who was only a few months old. And we got stuck in the snow. We couldn't go any further. We just simply could not move. Who's been on the New York State Thruway in the wintertime? Yeah, okay. So it's, you know, it's the lake effect snow. You don't know when it's going to come, but when it comes, it comes. So there we are, stuck on the side of the road in a car in which the gas, there's not a lot of gasoline left in the tank. And it became clear that we weren't going any further, that we were going to run out of gas while we were sitting there, and that my parents were actually, I didn't realize it at the time, afraid for our lives. And at one point, when the snow let up just a little bit, my father saw lights of a house across a field. And he put on all the clothing he had brought with him and set out on foot. My mother, holding the baby, remained in the car with me and my brother. And my brother and I were sitting in the back seat singing a song that we had learned on the Mickey Mouse Club. Remember the Mickey Mouse Club? And we're in the back seat singing, "Adventure is everywhere," and not realizing the irony of the situation. We weren't afraid, but my mother was terrified. My father got to the house, got to use the telephone, made a phone call, and then came back to the car, and a little while later a tow truck came up, knocked on the window, and asked if we were a brown Chevrolet, because he couldn't see. There was too much snow covering it. Towed us out of there, took us to his gas station, where he lived above the stairs, took our whole family, all 5 of us, took us in and kept us in his house overnight. My brother and I slept on a pull-out couch, the first time I'd ever been on such a contraption in my life. I don't know where he put my parents and my baby brother, but they kept us there in the night and served us breakfast in the morning, and then set us back on the road again after our car had been towed out. That's what happened on the New York State Thruway. What would have happened to us if that man had not decided to help us out like that? Where would we have been? What would we have done? So what happened on the road to Jerusalem? We don't know much about these people in this story of the Magi. We don't really know what Magi were. We have some guesses, but nobody really knows who they were. Where did they come from? The East. Well, when you think about it, since we're on a globe, everything in the world is east of us, right? So even New Hampshire, if you go far enough east, you're going to come to it. So we don't know where they came from. We don't know who they were. We don't know what nationality we were. They don't know what religion they were. What we do know is that they were foreigners and they traveled. Now, if they came to Israel from the east, here's what they had to do. They had to cross an inhospitable desert. A terrible desert, one of the driest and hottest on the planet. They had to come across that. If they crossed that desert, and however they traveled, and we don't know, camels, donkeys, on foot, we're pretty sure they didn't drive a brown Chevrolet. When they traveled, if they had to stay overnight, where did they stay? They had to camp, or what else? What other possibility would there be? You're crossing the desert, what are you looking for? An oasis. Well, the oasis is nice because you'll have water, but what do you really need?
Shelter.
Yeah, you need shelter, because the hottest desert turns cold at night. You need shelter, you need food, and it is extremely likely that as these wise guys, whoever they were, and however many of them they were, and whether they were men or women or what, we don't know, it is extremely likely that on that trip to Jerusalem, somebody said to them, "Come to my place, come to my camp, come set up here. We'll give you some water, we'll water your animals, we will give you some food, come to my place." Because in that world, at that time, Hospitality was one of the highest values a person could have. If you were a hospitable person, that was considered to be one of the most important things you could do. You could not live in a world like that if you did not care for strangers and if strangers did not care for you. So people traveling would be taken into someone else's home in that town. It is extremely likely that this is what happened to the Magi as they traveled to Jerusalem. Somebody took them in and helped them. Don't know who, somebody did. And when they got to Mary and Joseph's house, where do you suppose they spent the night? Don't say the stable, folks. If you said the stable, I want you to pinch yourself right there, okay? They didn't go to the stable. They went to the house where Mary and Joseph lived at that time. They went to the house, and where do you think they spent the night? In the house, on the pull-out couch, exactly. Mary and Joseph had the first pull-out couch in history. It was a little small for three and their camels, but they got in there, so they stayed with Mary and Joseph. And when they stayed there, being hospitable people themselves, what did they have in their hands? Gifts. Here's a true story. A friend of mine was traveling through the Middle East, through Israel, and we're in Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem they had an address of a hostel, a youth hostel, that they were going to spend the night in. But they had trouble finding it because the streets in Jerusalem are laid out as if they were laid out 1,000 years ago. So they had a little trouble finding the address. When they finally found the address, they knocked on the door. The man opened the door. He immediately greeted them, welcomed them in. They went in, they sat down. The next thing they knew, a big meal was prepared. They sat down and they shared a meal with the man and his family who were running this hostel. They ate the meal, and then the man invited them to set them up with beds in various places around the house, and they spent the night there. There were 4 of them. And the next morning they got up and they continued on their way and were contacted by the people of the hostel they were supposed to stay at, who said, "Where were you? Why didn't you come last night?" They had knocked on the door of a complete stranger who did not expect them to come, didn't expect anyone to come, but they knocked on his door and he opened the door and said, "Of course, come in." And with no plans for them whatsoever, invited them in to stay for a meal and invited them to stay overnight. And how many of you would have done that? No, we would have said, there's a Motel 6 right over here. But times are different, of course. Times are different. So, what happened at Simon's party? Simon threw a dinner party, and he invited Jesus to come. Jesus was a well-known figure by that point, and Simon invited him to come, maybe because he wanted to hear what Jesus had to say, maybe because he wanted the status of having this local dignity, this interesting person come to his house. But they sat down, they had dinner, and this woman, and we don't know anything about her, hardly at all. We don't know her name, we don't know where she came from, we don't know what she looked like, we don't know anything about her. We just know that she was a sinner, and that meant that she was, not what you're thinking. She was a sinner could have meant just about anything. Maybe she didn't eat kosher food. Maybe she was an inhospitable person, which would place her in the ranks of a great sinner. What we do know is that at some point she had contact with Jesus. Jesus had forgiven her of her sinful ways, and she was so grateful for being forgiven that she fell at Jesus' feet there at that dinner party. I'm just trying to picture this. It wouldn't have happened in one of ours, I suppose. And cried and wept and kissed his feet and held his feet and poured perfume over them out of her gratitude that he had cared about her in any way. And what was Simon's reaction to all of this? What did he say? Why are you letting a sinner? Yes, if he knew what kind of woman this was, if he was a prophet, he would know that this is a sinful woman and should not be touching him. And that's when Jesus told his story about the gratitude of those who are forgiven. Now, here's the interesting thing about that is Jesus said, "Simon, you invited me here, and that sounds like a hospitable thing to do, but you didn't kiss me. You didn't pour oil on me when I came in. You didn't hardly do anything but sit me down and give me something to eat. You didn't show your gratitude for my reactions to you. But this woman hasn't stopped kissing me since I got here. She's been weeping and crying, and she has been forgiven. And what Jesus is pointing out is, Simon, you brought me into your house, but that didn't make you a hospitable person. You brought me in here and you fed me, but that doesn't mean you welcomed me, because you were passing judgment on both me and on this woman. This woman has welcomed me even though it's not her home. And that's what happened at Simon's party. What will happen at your house in this coming year? What kind of a house will you have? Will it be a hospitable place or not? Let me ask, I'm going to raise, for a show of hands here, where are the people here who really like to invite guests over and to have guests in your home? Okay, where are you? All right, so there's a good number of you here. That's great. Where, honesty time, where are the people who hate having to do that? Where are the people who do not like inviting people in? Come on, it's okay, it's okay. There are a few. There are more than have their hands raised, I'm sure. The Bible tells us that the ability to open your home to others is a gift. It's a spiritual gift, and some people have it and some people don't. But that's not really the question I'm asking today, because I'm asking how open your home is to other people. Not necessarily just as guests, but are you the kind of person that is open to someone else? Are you the kind of person who can be open to a person who is not like you, who is from another culture, or who is of a different generation, or who is from another language, or someone who is of a different color, or someone who is from the other political party, if you can imagine that? Are you the kind of person whose life will be open to a person like that? Will your home, your life, be open to another person? The question of whether to physically share your housing, your home, with another person can be a very difficult question. Some people have done it and some have not. Sometimes people have brought somebody in and it has changed the life of that person. Sometimes people have brought somebody in and it has been a disaster. I know these, I hear these stories. So I'm not saying that you need to open your door and let strangers in. I am, however, saying our lives have to somehow make room for strangers. And certainly, when we establish public policy, when we go to the polls and vote, we ought to make sure that we are voting for policies that care for the strangers and the lost and the homeless. If we are a society that doesn't care for its poorest and weakest people, we are a poor and weak society. And what will happen at our house? Our house. What will happen here? We have become, I think, we have become the kind of a church that somebody can walk into and feel that they are welcome and accepted there. I think that's a good thing about us. I have found this church to be a loving and welcoming place. And it's not always been easy, but we certainly are willing. That's who we want to be. And today, we're going to ask that question of ourselves in a really profound way, is are we going to we're going to consider whether we are going to share our building with another congregation. Now, I am not going to tell you whether I think we should or should not. I'm not going to stand here and say that hospitality demands that we let them in. I'm not going to say that. I am going to say this: hospitality demands that we consider that. Hospitality, in the largest sense, the biblical sense, means that we have to consider what is good for all people, what is the best possible solution for all people. And it may mean we allow a stranger in, and it may mean we help a stranger find another place, and it may mean we have to say no. All of those are possibilities because we are seeking to do what thing is most loving. Hospitality is the essence of what we do. And one of the things that I love about this church, and I'm going to love it today, one of the things I love is that this table, where we say Christ is present, is a table that is welcome to everyone. I have been in a church where they did not allow me to take communion. It happened to me twice. They've excluded me because they did not feel that my beliefs were in line with their beliefs. We're not going to ask you that question today. We're going to ask this question. Would you like to come in? Would you like to come to the table? It's the only question we have for you. And if you want to come to the table, you come to the table today. We are going to practice some radical hospitality today and welcome you. Yeah? Yes. We're going to even welcome you. Can you imagine that? Even you are welcome here today. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.